Just before I actually kick off, I just thought I might just make a quick little comment on a point that Marie touched on. Obviously, my presentation today is actually from the Garbo's point of view. So we're just the poor little buggers that have to get out there and pick up the material. But Marie spoke about the compactors, and probably 98% of what Marie put forward, I would have to say I agree with. There was one comment that Marie made, and not being critical, where I'd probably disagree. It actually provides, by having the same truck service the two compactors, let's assume you have a commingled compactor, let's assume you have a waste compactor. If you service both those compactors whilst that truck is on site, because the same truck will service both those bins, it's actually a lot more cost effective for you because it provides the economies of scale. And whilst you still have two truck movements, it's certainly going to provide you a better result and a better outcome longer term, because that truck has to come back to bring that bin back. So whilst he's there, he may as well service the other one, cut down his downtime, and therefore give you a more cost effective outcome. So it's probably the only point, Marie, that we might have a different view. It's certainly about dollars versus safety versus risk. There will also be a fair bit of duplication, which in some regards I apologise for, but at the same time it's probably a really good follow-up from Marie's presentation, because what I'll touch on is a lot of the issues that we actually encounter, and the issues that we see day in, day out, primarily around multi-unit dwellings. Marie's already touched on, and I think one of the most critical points is that the more planning you can do up front, the more thought you can put into it before you build it, generally the better the outcome will be. So obviously we continue to see an increasing demand for medium and high density dwelling. That's just a show of the times. That's where we're at. We want to get more people on a smaller footprint, and we tend to go up. And when we go up, more people, more waste volumes, more inherent issues that starts to introduce. Problems such as outside of waste, medium to high density poses a whole range of other related issues. So places greater demand on public transport, open space, parking, pedestrian safety. Generally what we find is that the medium to high density developments occur around things like your railway corridors, main roads, again to try and encourage people to use public transport and other means of transport. Not sure if you've driven down past any railway corridors, but generally railway corridors are already parked out. So what we do is we knock down single homes and we build units in areas where we've already got parking and other issues. So we've already got traffic issues, we've already got transport issues, we've already got parking issues. And what we do is we knock down, we rebuild, and then we put more people in there, and more people who have cars who have to park somewhere. And generally what we find is that through our DCPs and our other planning instruments, we don't allow enough on-site parking. So again, they've got to go somewhere. And that then poses a whole range of other associated issues. So, the good news. From our point of view, from a waste contractor's point of view, every problem has a solution. And we're probably the guys that can fix it for you. But many of the solutions may come at a cost. So it's not as simple as customised solutions. Fine, we can do it. We can engineer a solution. We can do your carousels, we can do your chutes, we can do your compactors. All of that's doable. Small trucks, you want small trucks? We can provide small trucks. Small trucks carry less weight, services less bins. So less bins per truck, per load means more truck movements. More truck movements means more drivers. More drivers means more dollars. So it starts to compound. Obviously, as we increase the density in these developments, we also, and again Marie touched on this, we've got to start looking at things like variable bin types and the waste streams, bin placements. Frequency is also an issue. Quite often what I see talking to a number of local councils is that they think the solution is, well, we'll put fewer bins because that way we've got fewer 240s presented at curbside, but we'll get you to come 3 days a week. So now in all these areas, which are already parked out, and we've got all these safety issues, and we've got all these risks, we've now just multiplied it by 3. So we're going to do it 3 times a week. So again, we might come up with what seems to be a very simple solution to a problem, but we end up creating other risks or other associated issues. A lot of councils now contract their waste services out, certainly in New South Wales. And the councils need to be aware that that does not exempt you from your normal responsibilities and your chain of responsibility, particularly when it comes to OH&S issues and risk. So you still have a legal responsibility. You don't exempt yourself from that simply because you outsource it. Local government generally, what we find now is that the waste contracts are generally in the range 7 to 10 years. Can vary, you can get somewhere around the 5 years. But what we find is that council elections are every 4 years. So if we change our elected representatives over every 4 years, chances are some of those councillors have actually changed in that 7 to 10 year period. So when they change, that introduces change in policies, change in views, change in ideas. What the previous council did probably didn't work, so we're going to do it different. And if those decisions and policy and changes are being made relating to waste, it may well have an impact on your waste contract. So you already have a waste contract in place, certain criteria, a contractually contractually binding agreement. Then all of a sudden we want to change the way we do things within the term of that agreement. Now again, you can do it. You can build instruments, you can build the measures, you can build terms and conditions into that agreement that allows it to happen. However, when you start altering, when you start requiring retrofit changes in service type, again, it needs to be negotiated and it comes at a cost. So there's other costs that you start to introduce if you're going to make changes within that term of that contract. So we need to start planning longer term. We need to start planning well before we actually build it, as Marie said, and then we need to see that through. Planners and designers. I'm not a planner and I'm not a designer. I did have 18 years in local government. I was a building inspector. Planning instruments is, I touched on before, your waste policies, your waste DCPs, your waste management plans, all very, very important documents. Now, I won't pretend I know the ins and outs and the detail, and Marie's certainly given great insight into that. What we are finding is that obviously as there's changing needs and more people residing smaller footprint, we need to explore the alternatives. And if you have factored those into your instruments up front, it certainly makes it a lot easier and smoother path to introduce. I've already touched on issues such as the streets being parked out, access issues, safety issues. Marie showed some photos there of trucks trying to get in there. A point to notice as well is when we talk about side loaders, we talk about rear loaders, and we were talking about hook lift. They're all generally the same size chassis. So the wheelbase is the same, the width of those trucks are generally the same, similar, plus or minus maybe a couple inches. So unless you start to really go down to the small truck option, which again will become a lot more expensive, then you're really dealing with the same type of truck and the same turning circles, and you've still got to manoeuvre that truck in a space. One of the single biggest issues we have councils will come forward and say, oh, you know, well, what we'll do, we'll just get you to come on site and we'll store the bins down the back and you can just reverse down to where the bins are. Yeah, that's great. That'll work. However, generally your driveways, they're constructed for a car, not for 23, 24 tonne. So you start running a truck down there, next minute we've got concrete cracking, we've got stormwater pits failing, we've got all these other asset issues and maintenance, and what happens? It's going to come back to me because I took that truck in there. So all of a sudden, we now carry the can for something that's just not been designed, doesn't have the integrity, hasn't been to the standard of construction to allow us to provide that type of service. Again, get it in the planning up front. If that's what you want us to do, that's fine, but it's got to be designed to cater for it. And if it's not, you're going to have a lot of problems down the track. Very busy slide, that one. Again, we've probably touched on a lot of these points. Is that the time already? Oh, you just bumped it? Okay. You want me to skip a few slides? Let's skip that one. And I think what I'd like to do, because I could probably talk for an hour, is maybe have a look at a couple of photos here, and I've hopefully not identified which council because I don't want to offend anyone or upset anyone. Marie spoke about the top left there is probably what I would consider the close to the ideal scenario. That particular fairly new development, probably a couple of years old. It has 660 litre bins in there. That is the access from a fairly main road, fairly busy road. Those bollards can be removed. The contractor has the key to move those. He can come in, he reverses into the little turning area there once the bollards have been removed, and the bins are basically in that door there. That is probably less than 20 metres from the street. From an aesthetics point of view, from a planning point of view, looks pretty neat and tidy to me. It's got a nice little bit of landscaping in the front. From a collection point of view, we love it. Works for us. Yeah, we're not blocking the access which goes down in the basement parking and all that. So, to me, that was probably a really good example of where a council, and this particular council, has really thought it through. And pretty much in that situation, I think they've pretty much nailed it. Some of these other designs, they're really nice. They look great street appeal. The one on the right looks really nice. Again, nicely landscaped, nice little ramp goes up into the bin bay there. The problem is, from the front of the property to the bin bay is probably about 30 metres. Very limited lighting if we're doing it early mornings. Had to basically double park out in the street because it was all parked out anyway. It was right near a railway station. And there was about 50 to 40 litre bins in that bin bay, 2 at a time, out through the door, down the ramp to the street, back, blah, 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 blah. So you can start to see some of the issues that we start to experience. I'll skip this one. The bins aren't down the ramp. The bins are actually in a nice little bin room, elevated bin room at the back there. You can just see the bins through the windows. Same deal. The truck has to park in that driveway. That's the main basement parking for the residents. There is nowhere else in the street to park the truck. He reverses into that driveway, has to go up that ramp to the left, into the bin bay. Same deal. There was 100 bins up there. So 100 bins takes how long? Not sure how long we had on your graph, Marie. But he's going to be blocking that driveway now while he's servicing those bins because that's the only way you can get to those bins. These were some photos of older style bin bays. These are more townhouse type developments, but these bin bays were really designed for the old 55, 60 litre type galvanised bins. Probably ideal for those style of bins. However, we've gone to the 240. You've now got the one on the bottom right here, you've got about a 6-inch step into the bin bay. So you're getting 240s in and out of there. So that starts to create a few OH&S issues, apart from the fact you actually can't get all the bins you need in that bin bay anymore. And these are just good examples of where we've sort of moved beyond what was a good solution in its day, probably back in the 70s and 80s. But we've not actually imposed on the owners of those properties to do some upgrade to make it a bit more collection friendly. And whilst we've changed the bin method, the collection method, we've not adjusted the other infrastructure to actually support that. So again, it starts to introduce a whole range of issues. So I know I've probably gone past my time, so I'll wrap it up with this one. So the biggest, again, plan ahead. Do all your planning, get it right, get your instruments right, understand what it is that you want, and to make sure that whatever method you decide is the best scenario or best option for that particular development, make sure it is practical, make sure it's going to work. And don't be afraid of actually, if you've got a waste contractor, don't be afraid to talk to your waste contractor, your current supplier, well in advance before you start preparing your tender documentation as well. I touched on the small trucks. Small trucks are not always the solution. It's part of a solution. It can fix some problems, but again, it can become really expensive because you've got a lot more truck movements and, as I say, smaller payloads. A small truck costs you roughly the same in maintenance, fuel and everything else to run from an operating point of view. But if you get a smaller payload and you've got to run more trucks for a smaller payload, it also means you need drivers because we haven't quite got trucks that drive themselves. So if you go a smaller truck that, say, can only carry 3 tonne as opposed to a standard truck which will carry 9 tonne, straight away you need 3 times the number of vehicles to do the same number of bins, which means you need 3 times drivers. Again, more travel to and from the tip, which means more downtime, which means more overtime, becomes more costly. Planning instruments we touched on. If I can, just one closing point. In your tender documents, try and be more specific about the outputs you want and the outcomes you want. And leave the solutions to the experts, which are generally your waste contractors. I saw in a tender document recently, again, a very well written document, won't be critical, won't identify who it was. And in the pricing schedule, it wanted pricing for a compactor. So it wanted waste compactors. There was no mention about, does it need bin lifters? Is it chutes? Is it hoppers? Do you want an integrated compactor? Do you want a stationary compactor? What are your height restrictions? What's your access like? All of these things that we've got to consider to even give you a price on that. But in the tender document, it wanted a price. You don't just buy a compactor off the shelf. So again, you need to know, if you're not 100% sure about what it is you want, then specify the outcome or the output that you need and allow the experts to give you what they deem to be the best solution. Okay?